Welcome to the ninth lecture of Haiti, the most important country in the world. This is where I upload the class that I teach to mostly freshmen here at the college where I work. As a reminder, online learning is passive learning, real learning is active. So I suggest you take notes. This is not going to be a substitute for a real class taught by even a real expert in Haiti, which I am not. But hopefully you will find it interesting and hopefully you will learn something. Today we are going to talk about the revolution continuing after it had stalled, and let's get to the PowerPoint and get to it right now. Students and friends, I am Professor Sky. My name is perhaps known to you. I have undertaken to teach about Haiti. I want curiosity and a thirst for complex understanding to reign in this class. I am working to help that happen. Unite yourselves, students, and learn with me for the same cause. We're going to be doing a lot today. A little art show for my students who drew the Bois Quémont. One of you sent me a post on Instagram of your drawing of Bois Quémont, and I liked it. So thank you. Keep sending those to me. I want to see your drawings. It's good. It's a sign that you're doing it. Sorry, I don't have your name. I'll remember it next time if you send me a message. We'll review what royalism means, three colonial powers, Galbaud versus Sontonax versus Palvarel, the cap burns, freedom-ish, and freedom, and the switch. Before I even really say too much more, I need to just mention the sources. Today's sources are primarily the Revolutions podcast by Mike Duncan and Black Jacobins by CLR James. I'm going to be quoting CLR James with some frequency. This is what I ask my students' notes to look like. So there you go. What do you think? Who did a better drawing of Bois Quémont? So on the left, you see students 2025 and 2018, you see over there. On the right is my drawing of Romaine la Prophétesse. I think my drawing has improved, although I think maybe the 2018, that's pretty nice. All the essential elements of the Bois Quémont. Check out two classes ago if you haven't seen it. So the question that I ask my students to remind themselves is, why is it that Sontonax, who, if you don't remember, was a member of the commission that was sent from France to help control things in Haiti, in Saint-Domingue, as it was then called. And he realized that he felt alienated from all the groups there, that he had a partner whose name was Lavaux. This was all in the last class, which I uploaded, who successfully almost entirely pushed away the slave revolt. He took Biassou and drove him into the mountains. He took Jean-Francois and drove him to Santo Domingo. Toussaint was with Jean-Francois. He understood an important thing, which was it's not enough to just exile, to kick the enslaved people out of the fields, just as a quick reminder here, like the slave insurrection happened and they rose up against their masters in 1791. We're deep into 1793 here. It took a long time for them to actually do stuff, and so they just like hung around in the plains up north, and they just were like planting. And so sometimes the forces would come to kick them out, but they wouldn't think to destroy their plots, and that's what Lavaux figured out to do. So the slave revolt was almost stopped. As CLR James says, insurrection nevertheless now seemed at its last gasp. But just when you needed it to happen, something changed in Europe, which change would happen in Saint-Domingue as keeps on happening. We have these three powers that are fighting for control all out throughout the Caribbean. Spain promised to the enslaved people that if they join them, and Spain wins, as seemed pretty likely at this point because France was in some state of disarray, to put it kindly, they will recognize the freedom of the enslaved people, which is a crucial difference. They're not giving freedom, they're recognizing it. Slave was not abolitionist. I mean, Spain was not abolitionist. There was slavery all over their empire, but still, Biassou, Jean-Francois, all joined. Toussaint went also, but he made his terms with the Spaniards as an independent leader. Always Toussaint is one step ahead of everybody, a brilliant tactician. He doesn't just join as Jean-Francois's number two, but as his own leader. And at this point, he's already somewhat famous as being the most intelligent, the most strategic, the best organized, the best forces on the island. So the whites helped the English, because they just lost everything. And so the England promises to them, if you fight alongside us, you help us take over this island, everything goes back to normal. Don't worry, We'll get all the sugar plantations back, and you'll be rich, and we'll be rich, and France will be out, and we'll have everything just like it used to be. Which is why the mixed race inhabitants, the free coloreds of Saint-Domingue, ended up being the only real friends of the Republic because they had the most to gain. Everybody is just acting in self-interest. And why not? Of course, that's the nature of history, much less Haitian history. So the only people who are really looking out for the two things that the free coloreds want, just as a reminder, they want to be treated equal to whites and they want the ability to own slaves. Those are the two things that they want. At this point, the only people who are promising those two things at the same time is the French Republic. So that's why the commissioner, Sotonax, in the north, Poverel in the south, in the west, agreed to work with them. So first they target the whites in Port-au-Prince, and by May 1793, most of the white uprising had been controlled. Sotonax does something interesting where he basically does the Code Noir plus, that's what I call it. So he he announces that France has the intention of continuing slavery, but everything that was promised to the enslaved people, every positive thing that had been ignored for so many years, will no longer be ignored. They will be forced. They will force the owners to treat the enslaved people with respect, to not whip and torture, to not humiliate, to feed and clothe and care for, all those things. And most importantly, he read it in Creole. And I tried to emphasize the importance of this to my class. I'm not sure they got it. It's really important that he read it in Creole. Okay. By reading it in Creole, not only is France particularly proud of its language, but that's the language of the dominator, the language of domination. So to use the language that was created by and focus through the actual experience and the voice of the people themselves, it was a powerful linguistic and political action. Of all the things Sotonax did that's interesting, I don't think this gets enough credit. Okay, going back to this. And then a new colonial governor arrives, Galbaud. Okay, so Galbaud. Galbaud. What to say about Galbaud? So the colonial governor is lower in the hierarchy than the commissioners, but he arrives in Le Cap, which, as a reminder, is in the north. Here, I've 1 second here. I'll stop share here. This is Haiti, the Aftershocks of History by Laurent Dubois. Excellent book. It has a map in the first couple of pages, as they all should. Okay. So Le Cap is up here. All right. It's all the way up there. And this is the south and the west. And this is where like the commissioners are, and this is where Galbaud arrives. So he arrives, and if you've been paying attention to the class, you know, things are pretty crazy in the Cap. Since 1791, a lot of whites fled there because their plantations had burned down and people had been murdered. And they're all living there. And a lot of enslaved Africans were just murdered on the street because they fear that they might do the same thing. This guy, Galbaud, arrives. And what France needed to do was send a smart, capable, compassionate, flexible, wide-ranging, dynamic presence to send to the island. Instead, I'll skip past this slide. Instead, they send Galbaud. Galbaud, you're the worst. Why pick him? France had this weird tendency, even though it was the most profitable piece of land on planet Earth, they sent colonial governors who just like rubrics, just sticking forks in their eyes, just not even thinking, just why him? Why in the world did you pick him? It was even illegal to pick him because they had a rule where you couldn't send somebody who owned land in Saint-Domingue to be a governor of Saint-Domingue for very important reasons. If you own land, you are more interested in protecting land than you are in protecting the interests of the government that you represent. There should not be conflicts of interest between the person who's in charge based on how much money they can make based on what they do. So he was in and of himself kind of a big white. So he shows up, and obviously he shows up. And instead of thinking about the colors or the enslaved people, he immediately sides with the whites and the royalists. He incites an insurrection. He tries to take over the whole damn city. He tries to arrest Sotonax. He just shows up, and even though he's lower on the totem pole, he just goes absolutely buck wild, doing whatever the hell he wants with him and his racist wife. They even tried to have a dinner together with Sotonax and Poverel, but they had non-white partner, and it was like, no, 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 we can't eat together. So Sotonax is sort of all right. He grants freedom to any slave who fights for the Republic. This is why they're called the citizens of June 20th. He eventually extends this to white wives and children, but it's freedom-ish, right? It's not actual freedom because you have to fight for it. You're not just given freedom, you have to put your life on the line for the French Republic. So it's freedom-ish. But still, we're seeing how much it's getting pushed, and he got pushed into it because they had a plan of how they were trying to do things, kind of slowly like this and slowly like that, and then all of a sudden, this Galbaud character shows up and just starts making everything just fritzing everything out. So someone asked me to put a uh, a content warning when I am going to talk about stuff that is going to entail violence. So there is a content warning. There is some violence in this episode here, where we're talking about Le Cap, the Pearl of the Antilles, the most important city in the Caribbean, where all the sugar flew through. Let's see what happened in June 1793 with this beautiful image from the time. I'm just going to do it all through this one image. Are you ready? The sailors are annoyed. They're idle. There was like a blockade from the British, and they were just kind of held there, and like they were just a bunch of drunk, bored, angry sailors. A lot of them just sitting in the harbor. The whites in the city, both big and small, are annoyed. They had to filter in here. They're afraid to go outside of the city. They feel like any minute they're going to be killed in their beds. The sugar has stopped flowing the way it used to flow. And then this ass clown shows up, Galbaud. He shows up and he listens to the whites and he just starts going crazy and realizing, I've got to fix things. I've got to fix things. He and the sailors start to threaten the city. Now, not the officers, but the sailors, the rank and file, the Popeyes, okay? Not the admirals. He gets them. He gets them to turn the ships around and face the guns towards the ships. Terrifying. Now, he didn't get the officers on board, but he did get all the sailors, the lower in the totem pole, lower in the hierarchy of the Navy, and they're all there. And so they launch an attack to go arrest Sontonax and to restore order to the colony, get it back to the way it used to be, with the whites having all the power and everyone else having the no power. Okay, that was the whole idea. He wants to reverse all equality, reverse abolition, reverse equality between whites and coloreds, the whole thing. So how did it fail? It failed spectacularly. First of all, there were superior forces inside the city. Just they were outnumbered. The naval officers, so when he realized they were outnumbered, Galbaud, basically sends a communique back to the admirals and everything, says, you got to fire on the city. And the admiral's like, whoa, 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 who are you? You're a colonial governor? No, no, you don't have rank to tell me what to do. We're gonna hang tight here. The victory was not in sight, so that night the whites started looting. The blacks started looting as well. The enslaved people, maybe some of them broke free. Maybe some of them saw what they could do because all the whites in their houses were just terrified because there's so much violence going on out in the streets. Streets were filled with roving, angry mobs of blacks and whites who would run into each other and start fighting each other, like in Beat It or West Side Story, except actually killing each other and all the violence. The streets were running red with blood, but it's even worse. What's worse than streets running red with blood? It's streets glowing orange with fire. This is what Galbaud did. A situation that was not stable. He made much, much worse. So I want you to imagine that you are a white citizen seeing the governor general, the guy who just came here from France, swimming out to a boat. And you can only see him because the city is so on fire that the light reflects onto the water. And you see him dressed in this full, military uniform. And he's just, and he can't even wait for the small boat to ferry him to the bigger boat. He's just swimming in the bay, trying to get away from everybody, completely desperate. How would you feel? Well, 85% of the city burned to the ground. This is why Almost all the whites fled. They either went into the country or they went onto ships to try to go home. Depending on what sources you read, 3,000 to 10,000 people killed. Here's from CLR James again. So Tonax returned to Le Cap, a town half ruined. To his surprise, the pillage over, the revolted slaves did not stay with the commissioners. Gathering up their plunder, they went back to the roving life in the hills, and over to their Spanish allies. The French sent envoys to win them over. Toussaint included replied that they could only obey a king. They would only recognize the commissioners when they had a king. Did Toussaint Louverture care about whether or not it was a democracy or a republic in France? No, but he was smart enough to know that whatever side the enslaved people had to join had to be the winning side. So he was hanging back. He was hanging back and trying to figure out what's the play. How do I get my people on the winning side so that we can get freedom? That's what he was doing. That's what a general does. Galbaud, you're the worst, and your wife sucks too. So a lot of the whites head off and they leave. There's a quote from Mike Duncan. Just Mike F. and Duncan, everybody. Le Cap Francais, once the Paris of the Antilles, now a fiery ghost town littered with dead bodies. So he offers the same deal refused by the royalists. He offers them and then he just gives up. On August 29th, with Poverel in the south, at the same time, they declare complete abolition, no more slavery. Because they realize the Spanish and the British are going to show up and start taking over. And they realize they don't really have the support of the whites and the coloreds. And you have the 500,000 people there. You have the 500,000 people. You got to. So it's freedom ish. Instead of being freed people, they would be freed cultivators, which meant they still had to do all the same work they used to do. It's just now they will be paid some amount of money. They will be free to leave in theory, but if you put someone on a boat and send them over to a different country and force them to get stung by sugar all day, every day, and to cut down with the machete and get burned and get cut and get whipped and get tortured if you step off and do that every single day for, like 10 hours a day. And then you feel like you're free and you're told you're free as long as you go back to doing the same thing. Is that freedom? Poverel down in the west and south says the same thing. So this is the time where Toussaint Louverture, the same day, makes his declaration to all of the slave armies. This is his famous letter at Camp Tourelle. And you might recognize this from how I began every single class. Brothers and friends, I am Toussaint Louverture. Perhaps my name has made itself known to you. I've undertaken vengeance. I want liberty and equality to reign in Saint-Domingue. I am working to make that happen. Unite yourselves to us, brothers, and fight with us for the same cause. I love how CLR James describes this letter. This curious document shows already that Toussaint had changed his name from Breda to Louverture, which is a French word which means the opening, and had already reason to expect that his name was known. I mean, that's such a gangster move. Like, my name is Toussaint. You've already heard my name. But what's most noteworthy is the confidence with which he is riding two horses at once. He uses the prestige of his position as the general of the armies of the king, but he calls on the Negroes in the name of liberty and equality, the watchwords of the French Revolution, of which royalty was the sworn enemy. Neither would help his aims, so he was using both. Let's just take a second with that line. Neither would help his aim, so he was using both. You had the royalist tendencies, the ideas that you need to have a king and royalty and the ancien regime and the way things used to be. So he was using some of that imagery and that style to do. And then he was also using the Republican, because the whole thing in Europe was like, will France be a republic? Will monarchies exist? Will this whole system keep going? Or is the French Revolution going to bring in the current moment that we're living in, where most civilized nations in Europe are monarchies or constitutional monarchies, right? So or democracies or constitutional monarchies, right? So he's using both because he knows neither of them will help him. It's just when you talk about heroes, we talk about heroes in history who figured out how to make their way out of an impossible situation. The brilliance, the cunning that he has, it's just beautiful. Meanwhile, back in France, this isn't that important, except to say that whatever happens in France happens in the Caribbean and vice versa. So the Girondins were one group of revolutionaries who were getting just systematically murdered by a different group. And so, like Brissot, one of the founders of the Society of the Friends of the Blacks, he was a Girondin. He gets his head cut off. The Second Commission, so we're talking Sonthonax and Poverel, they were sent by them because they were Girondins. So, like, they're being called back because it's like, hey, you're not the guys anymore. We're different guys now. France is different guys. France was these guys. Now France is different people. Now we're totally different. We need different representation. So many people fumbled the bag so many times for it to go like this. Meanwhile, in mid-September 1793, some of the whites down in Jérémie, all the way there, you see to the west, you see my little hand-drawn map. Yoo-hoo! Britain, we are vulnerable. They call over to Jamaica and say, hey, you should probably invade, and the British do. And in Mont Saint Nicolas, all the way up there, they say, hey, Brits, you should probably invade, and so they do. Sonthonax, with everybody free, realizes he needs more help from France. He needs more help from France. He needs more help. He needs more soldiers. He needs more support because the British are coming. The Spanish are on the border. Everything is going sideways, and they need to say, what are we about? So he comes up with the tricolor commission, tricolor, which is beautiful because the three colors are white, colored, and black. The three groups we've been talking about, all together, including one of the great figures of world history, does not get mentioned enough, Jean-Baptiste Belley, who was one of the defenders of Le Cap. He helped to protect the Republican strongholds against the whites, like with like a gun. It's like, get away from you seditious, racist bastards, you know? And he's from the de Gorée. He's actually from the island of Gorée. He's like from that island, sold into slavery when he was 2 years old. This guy. These are the other members. Not super important who they are. Not super important who they are. Not as important as Belly. What's important is that there's three of them and they're all together and they're working to represent the aims of Saint-Domingue. Finally, a commission is being sent back to France instead of just getting commissions from France. They're sent by Sonthonax. They are to represent Saint-Domingue to the rest of the world. But before they go to France, they go to another little country I like to call home, the United States of America. Now, the problem was, remember how I was saying all those people got on those boats and ran away? A lot of them went to America. There were like whole societies, like helping the poor refugees of Saint-Domingue. Oh, these poor whites, all they did wrong was a little bit of owning slavery, and now all of a sudden they're being exiled. So yeah, that's a lot of them were already there. Galbaud showed up. You got to hear the story. Galbaud was like he was running because Genet was the French ambassador and he hunted down Galbaud because, Galbaud was supposed to do something and he did the opposite. He was an enemy of the revolution. He was trying to be a royalist. He was trying to go against the commission. He was trying to go against the Republic. They chased him up to New Hampshire and up to Canada and back down to New Hampshire. And he figured out how to also kind of manage the whites. And so while making their case, Jean-Baptiste Belley was the first black representative ever speak to the American government. Now you know. The first black representative to speak to the American government was born in Senegal, free, enslaved at 2 years old, shipped to Saint-Domingue. So the refugee whites were kind of all over the place. Some stayed in the United States. Some went back to France during the terror. I personally would have learned to appreciate Philadelphia if I was one of those guys. And some went back to Saint-Domingue and mostly joined the British and the Spanish because they were just hoping that things would go back to normal. So the commission shows up. The Tricolor Commission shows up to France in absolute chaos. I tried to find a good image of what it looked like. The boat shows up. Hey guys, what's up? The Tricolor Commission. And that's basically how it is. Just we're a bit busy at the moment. We're too busy trying to figure out whose head to chop off now. We don't figure like even though the entire financial health of the entire empire rested on the shoulders of the people who cut the sugar, they could not be bothered to really address the colonial issue properly. So the Tricolor Commission goes there, they speak around this time. The Girondins have been asked to come back, Pauvrel and Sonthonax, and then finally they realize, well, no, it's actually they're not the problem. The Girondins are not the problem. The problems are the whites who are in league with the British. So it's kind of lucky that they arrived in 94 instead of in 1793, because if they arrived in 1793, they'd probably be conceived of as like an enemy because they'd be attached to Sonthonax. But finally, the French get it through their skull that the whites are actually the anti-republicans. They show up, they get jailed, and then unjailed. Is unjailed a word? Tell me in the comments. I ask my students. I feel like it isn't. And then we had Jean-Baptiste Belly giving a speech, the first black legislator in human history, who was listened to partly because the big whites were the face of treason. So the opposite of the big whites might be more faithful to the Republic. So, like within the span of a year, Jean-Baptiste Belly goes from being the first black person to speak to the American government to the first black person to speak to a European government. And you might not have known his name before today. Isn't history great? Now, there was a speech. I've seen some people say Dufay said it, and I've seen in CLR James that Belly said it. And it was a long speech, and it was all cap. It wasn't all cap, but it was mostly a lie. It was not a lie, but it was saying that all the slave army, they needed to be freed because they were fighting for the Republic against the tyranny of the Spanish and the British. Like they can protect France's interest. When in reality, of course, a lot of the slave armies most of them were aligned with Spain. But like they ended up being correct afterwards, so they kind of faked it till they made it. So February 4th, 1494, what may be the first abolition in history, because the Tricolor Commission talked them into it. Everything that we've been talking about in this class, everything that's been leading up to this moment, actual abolition from the actual people in actual power. It happened. It's not freedom-ish. It's not a decree. It's not coloreds are free or equal to whites. It's not this. It's not that. It is general abolition for the entire French Empire. You're welcome, Guadeloupe and Martinique. You're welcome, other places that had enslaved people. They realize it is time to be free, and for two reasons. One, it's the right thing to do. We've known it's the right thing to do the whole time. We just couldn't do it for reasons. And also because they needed the manpower in this upcoming war. And they certainly needed the manpower because the coloreds tried to go to the British too. I mean, once this happens, the coloreds are like, well, what the hell? We wanted two things. We wanted slavery. We wanted to be the same thing as whites. We wanted to be equal to whites, and we wanted slavery. Now slavery is out the window, so what's the point? So they also invite the British, and they say, as long as you come in, British people, and you you reinstate slavery, and you say we're equal, we're fine. But they said no because they didn't want any equality because that was not part of their policy. As CLR James says, it was a crucial moment in world history. If the British could hold Saint-Domingue, the finest colony in the world, they would once more be a power in America waters. Instead of being abolitionists, they would be the most powerful practitioners and advocates of the slave trade, on a scale excelling anything they had ever done before. But they didn't. They were unable to make meaningful victories. There's too many diseases, soldiers dropping like flies, too many mountains. How do you get around? And there's too many armies. Some of the coloreds were for France, some of the slave armies were for themselves. There was just too much going on. They couldn't make much inroads. They did not succeed. Meanwhile, in the West, we got someone named Rigaud, who I talked about a couple classes ago. I call him Rigaud the Goldsmith. He is not known as Rigaud the Goldsmith anywhere online, but I think it's interesting because most of the people who I talk about are either enslaved people or enslaved people. So the fact that Rigaud was just like uh, a mixed race guy who has a trade and practices it, and is also an insanely important figure in the history of Haiti. So he is sort of the leader of the South, and he starts the Legion of Equality, where he enlists the slave armies as well, and that helps to push back the British as well. And then finally, we have the crucial moment. Toussaint switches from Spain to France. And he's cold. He straight up Order 66 is the Spaniards at one point. He just like they were all together and he's like, execute Order Setiete Seis, right? And he just they just turn on all the Spaniards who are around them and kill them all because he now recognizes their enemy. He saw it was time to switch. He knew the time. He was waiting for the time. It wasn't the time before, it's the time now. He's not interested in France, in Germany, in Indonesia, or whatever. He's not interested in Australia, not interested in Spain, not interested in England. He's interested in Toussaint's army. He's interested in the people of Saint-Domingue. So he holds the cordon of the West, which is the area that kept the sort of the separation between the northwest part and the north part, Le Cap, and he controls that. And he has like only, I think, 600 soldiers, but he is the best trained, the best mind. He is like the guy in Saint-Domingue. And he switches over to the French side. Why? More general freedom. The Spaniards were promising this, if you do that, if you do that, thanks to the decree. Done. Also, he was backing Spain because it didn't look like France would win. Here it seems that actually France might win this thing, so maybe you want to bet the good horse. Also, so he brought 4,000 soldiers to France. Toussaint got news of the decree sometime in May. The fate of the French in Saint-Domingue was hanging by a thread, but now the decree of Sonthonax was ratified in France. He did not hesitate a moment, but at once told Lavaux, who of course was the great leader, that he was willing to join him. Lavaux, overjoyed, accepted the offer and agreed to make him a brigadier general. Toussaint responded with a vigor and audacity that left all Saint-Domingue gasping. He sent a destitute Lavaux some good ammunition from the Spanish stores. He then persuaded his followers who were with him to change over, and all agreed. French soldiers, ex-slaves, and the rank and file, and all his officers, blacks and white royalists who had deserted the Republic to join him. So this is how it's going to remain here. Lavaux is going to be the colonial governor of the North. Rigaud will be the colonial governor of the South. Sonthonax and Poverel are going to leave, and that's where we're going to leave today's class. There's no more slavery at Saint-Domingue. It is roughly divided into North and South. Le Cap has burned down. The Spaniards have been betrayed. The Brits have failed. What's going to happen now? I want to know. When am I going to upload the next class? All right, you'll have to keep watching to find out. Thank you so much. I've had a little bit of an overly exciting time on my main channel, so it's really nice to come back to this to remember, like I'm a teacher, and I love being a teacher, and I appreciate the time to learn with me. All right, till next time. How do I stop this thing? There's the camera.